All right, finally, we are up to the Shema. All right, after all of this. So in our Siddurim, if you've got the weekday Siddur, you can find the Shema on page 30. And in the Shabbat and Festivals Siddur, it's on page 112. And the words are the same either way. So same price for each. Now, one of the things, before we even move into the words themselves, I just want to direct your attention to the overall unit that we're on of the Siddur, which is Kriyat Shema Ubirchotecha, right? So Kriya, likro is to read. So it's the recitation or the reading of the Shema Ubirchotecha and its blessings, right? So, and I've mentioned this before, that nowadays we kind of use in English the same word to pray, and that kind of covers a range of different things. But in fact, if we look at the rabbinic literature, they identify different terms or different verbs for doing different things. So for them, to pray meant to say what we would call the Amidah. And when it came to the Shema, the word they used was Kriya. Right? Is that a word that's familiar to anyone?
Yeah.
Sounds like
it's also used for the reading of the Torah.
Right. So when the Torah service is called Kriyat Torah, right? The reading of the Torah. And in fact, if we think about the Shema as being a passage, or really three passages from the Torah, then what that kind of does is it turns the reading of the Torah into a liturgical action, right? And so perhaps by reading the Shema, we're doing something that maybe is representative of the entire Torah, something along those lines. So this word kriya is a very important word. So let's keep it. Now, what we're going to do first is just look at the three paragraphs of the Shema. So as we can see from our little outline, the first paragraph is Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 4 to 9. And then we jump ahead 5 chapters, Deuteronomy chapter 11, verses 13 to 21. And then we go back a book for the third paragraph and recite Numbers chapter 14, verses 37 to 41. And so those three paragraphs together comprise what we would call Kriyat Shema, the recitation of the Shema. Okay, so let's look. This is in our Siddurim, the Shema. In fact, in any Siddur, the Shema is going to be laid out something like this. Joan, are you raising your hand with a question?
yes, actually,
Okay.
it wasn't a question, but could I make a comment?
Please.
The Shema, it just comes up as being so ultimately the important thing. And there's a man in my building who's 100 who went to Palestine after the Second World War, and they were assuming he and his wife were Arabs, and he said, no, we're Jews. And the way they had him prove it, they said, I'll say the beginning of a sentence and you finish it. And he said, Shema Yisrael.
And
that was the identification.
Right. So if there is one prayer that so a Jew should memorize, it's the first the first sentence of the Shema, right? It's probably the most recognizable Jewish sentence that we have. Now, and you'll see it laid out pretty much this exact same way in our Siddurim. We start with these three words at the top, El Melech Ne'eman, and you can see next to it, it says, if there is no minyan, add these three words. We'll get to that at a later point. And then we've got the Shema line. And then the next line is Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Le'olam Ba'ed, also smaller. And in our Siddur here, it says silently. Anybody, Mike, are you using a Mishkan Tefillah?
Yes, I am.
And is Baruch Shem, is it small like that?
They've gone artsy on this, and they've got the Shema line as a big arc with the two letters enlarged, and then they've got it down in just sort of regular letters below, and they have the whole thing taking up 2 pages.
Okay, so they went big.
On our seat.
Okay, good. So, and then we've got the next paragraph beginning ve'ahavta. But really, so the 2 small sentences are not part of the Shema, right? They're not from the Torah. So really, this is one paragraph together, beginning with Shema and ending at the end of this, uvisharecha. So Shema is just the first sentence of the paragraph. We tend to talk about, Shema and then ve'ahavta, but it's really, they kind of go together. They're not meant to be separated in the same way. So let's take a look. We're going to ignore El Melech Naaman and Baruch Shem for now. I'm going to read just the words. I'll read it in English. And let's think about what do these words mean, right? If you're reading this, if you can imagine you're seeing this for the first time, what are the themes that come up here? What's the message? What's the lesson? So, hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God. The Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. And these words which I command you this day shall be upon your heart. Teach them to your children. Recite them when you dwell in your home and when you walk on the road, when you lie down and when you rise up. Bind them as a sign on your arm, and they shall be as a symbol on your forehead. And you shall inscribe them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates.
We have to declare our allegiance. I get that.
All right, so it's a declaration of allegiance.
It's also saying, listen, you Jews.
Okay, so there's so that's, the English may not quite be able to capture the Hebrew, but the word Shema is a command verb, right? It's instructing. Listen, O Israel.
Rabbi, when I command you this day, who's the I?
That is an excellent question. Who is the I?
Hashem?
Who's speaking?
Who speaks for all of Deuteronomy? Moses.
Moses, right? This is Moses. So if we're going to take it in its context, Moses is the one speaking, right? He's telling the Israelites, listen, Israel, the Lord, our God, the Lord is one, right? So God here is the third person, right? Moses is the I. Moses is the subject of the verb, and Israel is the I guess the direct object, whereas God is the indirect object, right?
So this is when he's up on Mount Sinai?
No, this is the entire book of Deuteronomy is Moses speaking to the collected Israelites before they're about to enter into the promised land. Moses knowing he's not going to get to enter with them. And so he is kind of giving them a final series of pep talks and instructions. And so the word mitzavacha, Anochi mitzavacha hayom, I command you. So I, Moses, am commanding you. Now, of course, he is the prophet of God. So when he does so, he is doing that as God's prophet. But yeah, Moses is the speaker.
Thank you.
Yeah, Joan.
Yes. In this, are we commanded that we're always showing that we're Jews? What could be the villain, the tzitzis, the kippah. Is this asking us to always show it?
That's the question. What is it asking us to do?
To love God and to listen to what he's telling us to do.
Okay, so we've got ve'ahavta, you shall love. So there's a commandment to love. And then what else? What specifically, what are we supposed to do here?
Supposed to bind them on.
Well, we kind of pivot from God to the words of God.
Okay, right. So what is the them? It says teach them to your children, right? So that goes back to hadvarim ha'ela, these words. So Moses is speaking these words to the Israelites and saying to them, you got to, I'm speaking them to you right now, right? He says on this day, what is your job? Your job is to teach them to your children, right? You're going to recite them when you're dwelling in your home, when you're walking on the road, when you lie down, and when you rise up. So what does that mean? What is he asking them to do?
Totally internalize it every moment of every day.
Okay, so although here he's saying recite them, right?
Okay, so-
Dibarta is to speak them, to speak
To say
them,
the
right?
words.
Say
Yeah.
Now earlier we had a mention of your heart,
Yeah.
right? So we've spoken about this before, that when we talk about heart really means mind, right?
Yeah.
That's the internal aspect, right? So there's an element of an internal acceptance of something as well as external action, right? And so I would say that this verb love is, and I think I mentioned this last week as well, that it's definitely not the kind of passionate, emotional love that we think about. We're really talking about a covenantal love, and covenantal love is expressed through action. So what are the actions? The actions are actually listed in this paragraph, right? It's teaching your children, it's reciting the words, speaking them. Now, how about when you dwell in your home, when you walk on the road, when you lie down, when you rise up? How do you take those four expressions?
Well, when you recite them, are you actually verbalizing them, or are you verbalizing them just in your mind?
Excellent question.
Right.
Yeah.
Because we talked about the verb kriya, but the Shema itself doesn't appear to use kriya. Use what word is rendered as recite?
Dibarta bam, speak, but
Okay.
yeah, it doesn't say think them, right?
Yeah.
It's a speak.
But recite them still could be not verbally.
Yeah. So there's another word is vishinantam levanecha. Vishinantam
Yeah.
is to teach, but it's also to repeat, to repeat them to your children. Right.
Right.
So there's a command that these words are really important. Now, what are the words in question? Is it just these words, this paragraph? Probably not. It's probably actually the entire book of Deuteronomy is being referred to, or maybe as the rabbis then later understand it, it's Torah, kind of collect more, in a more encompassing way. Well, what about the dwell in your home and walk on the road, lie down and rise up? Is that literal or figurative?
Mm.
The lie down and rise up sound literal.
So you think literally, you lie down, you say them. When you rise up, you say them. Okay.
Well, when you go to bed and when you get up.
When you get
Well,
that's different, right? So Mike, you said it was a when you are in a certain position, like bodily position, but then you said no, it actually has to do with time.
Yeah, I read them as time.
You read it as time. Okay. So and when you dwell in your home, when you walk on the road, is that literal or figurative?
Figurative.
It's Sherry says figurative. All right.
Yeah.
But these are questions, right? So and
It doesn't make sense. You would be walking around every second of the day saying something.
right. So we might say is that this is wherever you are, whenever, right? In all places, at all times, right?
Yeah.
You've got to be reciting these words and making sure that you pass them on to your children. And then we've got a couple of specific things. Someone's got some music going on.
So, I'm sorry, it's my husband's phone. It'll go off in a second.
Okay, no problem.
Okay.
All right. So bind them as a sign on your arm. They shall be a symbol on your forehead. What is that talking about?
Tefillin.
Tefillin. How do you know? Doesn't say tefillin, right?
I think it's
So this is interpreted as tefillin, right? This is the basis of tefillin.
oh my gosh.
I'm so sorry.
That's
I'm
okay.
guilty.
That's okay.
That was Natasha.
So is this talk? So it doesn't say anything about tefillin. It's presumably it might be talking about an amulet of some sort, right? We're putting words on an amulet on our arm, on our forehead, arm being, our power, our might, our actions, forehead perhaps being our more of the internal, or our eyes, we're looking out into the world, and somehow these words need to be, with us at those times. And then finally, we put them on our doorposts on the house and your gates. So as we enter in, we cross the threshold between private and public, or the other way around, the words are with us, right? So it further emphasizes just the importance. It's not only time and place, it's also we have to put these reminders on our bodies and on the threshold of our homes, right? So if I want to take this, I would suggest that Moses is speaking figuratively here, right? He's trying to just stress the importance in all times, in all places, in every situation, that these words, you need to live your life by these words, and you need to repeat them, and you need to teach them to your children. But of course, we could also take this much more literally. And we'll see the rabbis do exactly that. Joan.
Yes,
I
just
have some,
want to know,
Wait,
are
hold on.
we told
Let's go
we
Joan,
have
then
to
Susan,
show
then
our
Oded.
bodies that we're Jews to the rest of the world? Is that part of it?
Sorry,
What?
say that again?
Do we have to show on our bodies by the tefillin or the kippah or the mezuzah on the door or something, and circumcision? Do we have to be able to show that we're Jews? Is that part of what we're told?
Well, that's a question. So who is the intended audience for binding them on our arms and foreheads? Who is the intended audience of putting them on the doorposts?
Jews.
The Jews.
Right. What is it? Is it me? Like, so when I put it on my arm, is it meant to be some sort of reminder to myself, or is it meant to show other people? Right. When I put it on my gate, is it to show the world, or is it to remind me as I pass over the threshold?
Well, this paragraph doesn't say. The third one might get into it, but this one, unless you want to say these are mechanisms through which you love the Lord your God, it doesn't get specific.
Yeah, I don't see anything anywhere in the Torah that suggests that we should keep our covenantal relationship with God secret or hidden in any way, right? I think it's meant to be public. Susan, yeah.
I was thinking about that. I don't know how it reads, the prohibition on tattoos, which might have been cicatrice, not a tattoo. But when I was reading this, it just seemed to me that this was something that we should be actually making a mark on ourselves. Because the binding word is not attached to what's on our forehead.
So the word is kshartem, which means to tie. So that's definitely not a tattoo word. So you're
But
tying.
how about the bind them as a symbol on your forehead?
Yeah. So interestingly, there's no verb, right? It's just vahayu. They shall be litotafot, as a totafot between your eyes, and nobody really knows what totafot means. Right. So that it's kind of perplexing about what exactly this might be referring to. Of course, it's interpreted by the rabbis as being essentially what our tefillin is an amulet, but what's inside the amulet, it's words, right? It's words of Torah, and it's specifically these words. So it's quite a literal reading of this by taking the words of this passage from the Torah and actually putting it inside of an amulet and putting it, really tying it under our arms and tying it before our eyes. It's quite literal. What did they do in the ancient world? I had a professor suggest that, maybe they would take God's name, Yud-He Vav-He, on a piece of parchment and somehow tie that on their arm or between their eyes or something to that effect. But Oded, you had something you wanted to say?
Yeah.
May I have one more thing before?
All right, no, Susan, follow up, then Oded. Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry, for Joan, I think I remember something from the Talmud that when you were in a place where everybody knew you, you could just walk around because they would know you were a scholar. But if you were in some place where they didn't know, you should dress scholarly or dress to be identified. So I think that there is somewhere, I feel like it's in Shabbat, I'm not sure, but some kind of tie into the way you look should identify you.
Yeah, although that might apply just to scholars.
I just wanted to put in, my son-in-law works with this Orthodox young man, Jewish, and he's afraid of Germany. And so when he goes to Germany, he never takes off the kippah or anything, but he keeps it covered with a baseball cap. And he's always pulling that baseball cap down around his head. Yeah. So he feels like he has to wear it, but he doesn't feel like he trusts the people to look at them.
Yeah, well, that's an unfortunate reality in some parts of the world today.
Right.
Yeah. Oded, go ahead.
Yeah, kind of interesting. You say Shema is for single, but when you say Eloheinu is our, that means he include himself in this Shema, because you say it's I'm part of you. That means the leadership have the same rule as the rest of the people.
Yeah.
Because outside say Adonai Elohim, but he say Elohim, it means include himself.
Right. And even going back a couple of words, says Shema Yisrael. So he says, listen, singular Israel. And so
Yeah.
he's speaking to the entire nation as a single unity, right? As a collective
Including.
one, right? And then he includes himself in it. Yeah.
So leadership is responsible for the same laws
Yeah. Absolutely.
as the rest of the people, which is quite interesting concept.
Wouldn't that be nice?
Nice. Secondly, he refer in this blessing or pray, he referred to single person that have to do all the stuff. That means he relate to Israel as one nation, as one body. And this is kind of interesting. Today we say, everyone have its own understanding, studying of Torah, and so on. He say, as a one body, Dibata Bam, that means it includes every single person as part of one nation.
So just to kind of repeat what Oded is pointing out is that all of the verbs in this paragraph are second person singular, right? So Moses is speaking to you, the individual, not you, the collective.
One nation.
It starts off with the collective statement about God, Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh being our God, but then, for you personally to love God, you personally have to do each of these things.
It's part of Israel.
Right. All right, let's go on. I want to talk about how do we actually translate this word? Because, our standard, Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. So that's kind of our standard translation. There's a problem with that is, Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God. Really, there should be a period right there. The Lord is one, another period, right? So this is really two different statements. The Lord is our God, the Lord is one. That's probably not what it means in the biblical context. So there's a couple of possibilities. So the first two words, that part is pretty clear. Shema is command to listen, and Moses is addressing Israel. Listen, Israel. I'm going to tell you something important. You need to listen carefully. So we could read this, Adonai Eloheinu, Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh is our God, period, Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. What is echad? One. It could be alone, not totally clear which it should be. Deuteronomy never has an explicit rejection of the existence of other gods. It certainly disses them and tells them they have no power and are unimportant and not worthy of being worshipped, but it doesn't deny their existence. So to say it that there is only one God in existence, this is not quite, at least in its context in the Torah, it's not quite a statement of monotheism. So I had a professor who suggested that the best translation is this. So Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, our God, is the one and only. And what this is doing is it's looking at the pattern here. We have God's name repeated twice. So but why is it repeated twice? Is it repeated twice because it wants to say it two times? Or is it repeated twice as emphasis? Right? And so and we know from lots of cases that the Torah will often repeat words, not that they should be translated as two separate things, but really it's to emphasize those two words. And by doing that, we've got this pattern. So Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh Eloheinu, Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh Echad. And so really that is meant to be a single statement. So what is that statement? Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, that's God's personal name, right? Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, our God is the one and only, right? Or the only one for us. So this becomes a statement of obedience and fealty to the God of heaven and earth, right? To Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. And so that's what Moses is instructing the Israelites to accept upon themselves, right? It's total loyalty to the Lord.
Well, that's in the Ten Commandments, actually. Is it not?
Well, it says, I'm the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt. You shall not have any other gods before me. never says there aren't any other gods. It just says you can't have any other gods. You can't be loyal to any other gods. Right. There are no clear statements of monotheism in the Torah. Right? There is, the Bible scholars will call it monolatry, right? Which is monolatry, right? So the worship of one God, or henotheism is another word that means basically the same thing. I'm not sure what heno means, but it's the worship of one God, a single God. Now, what about the next sentence, the ve'ahavta? All right, so let's look at these words. Ve'ahavta.
He's got church bells ringing in the background. Do you hear them?
I don't hear church bells, no.
No?
No.
Are you serious?
I don't hear them.
One of you has church bells. Are you near a church, anybody? I hear it like really blatant.
No,
I don't hear it.
I don't either. God.
All right, you shall love, that's et Adonai Lecha, the Lord your God. It's repeating this same expression. Now, 3 words. Bechol levavecha, uvechol nafshecha, uvechol me'odecha. Now note, just as we did in the previous sentence, we're repeating a pattern. Right? Bechol levavecha, bechol nafshecha, uvechol me'odecha. So bechol means with all. Right? Now, levavecha, what is a lev? Heart. Nafshecha, what's a nefesh? Soul. And me'odecha, what is me'od?
Strength.
A lot.
Yeah, a lot. Me'od, like tov me'od, right? Means very good, right? Very, a lot. But how do we translate this? Right? You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. And that is based on the rabbis, like the main midrash on this verse, right? Because they're struggling. How do you make sense of uvechol me'odecha, right? Because it means with all of your every, or with all of your very. It's not clear what it means. In its content, the syntax, it should be a noun, but me'od isn't really a noun. So they interpret it as being with all of your strength, with all your might. And that allows them to say that with all your heart, really that's your mind, right? That's the internal part, thoughts and emotions. Nafshecha, with all your soul, means we should be willing to sacrifice our lives for love of God. And with all of your might means your strength, really your possessions, they say, right? All the stuff you own needs to be directed towards the worship of God. So that's the rabbinic interpretation, which is what has made its way into most translations of this verse. But again, it's from a pshat perspective, from what the verse actually means, in its biblical context, it might mean something different. So first of all, I want to point out the pattern. It repeats the same pattern 3 times in a row, and that pattern means something. And the second thing I want to point out is that in the book of Deuteronomy, this expression occurs other places. There are other times where Moses tells the Israelites to listen. He says, Shema Yisrael, listen up. That appears several times in Deuteronomy in his series of speeches to them. The term bechol levavcha v'chol nafshecha also appears several times, with all of your heart and with all of your soul, without the me'odecha, right? So here the me'odecha gets added. It doesn't appear in other places. So is it trying to tell us something different? So again, I had a Bible professor when I was in rabbinical school suggested something like that it's basically a big exclamation point. With all of your mind and all of your nefesh, I'm translating here as self, exceedingly, right? So what is a nefesh? So this is a word that we've also talked about before, where in later Hebrew, it means soul, but in the Bible, it seems to not mean that. It seems to mean just a person, a person's existence. Almost.
Essence of the person?
Right? Yeah, it's who you are. It's your nefesh, right? So we'll talk about, so many, this is your life, right? So we've got an internal component and then the external physical life, right? So the mind, the thoughts, and then the self, right? Exceedingly, exclamation point. And that, if you think about what the rest of the paragraph was saying about the importance of reciting the words, keeping these words alive and active in your lives at all times and all places. So we do that with our minds, and we do it with our bodies. That's how we express our love for God.
I have some comments. Meodecha is with everything which is very important for you. That means it's not an adjective for nafshecha, levavcha, but there are three things that what you make you what you are is your nefesh, your lev, and your with everything that's important for you. Because some people, of your values, maybe, will be better to describe it. That means there's something that you cannot give up. And this is Modecha.
So
part of your body is what you want. This many times determines what you do. And this is Modecha.
So I don't want to, in talking about let's say the original context of this, I don't want to discount its meaning as prayer. This is not, when Moses delivers a speech, it's not a prayer.
Not a prayer,
it's instructions, right? But at some point, Jewish people started using these instructions of Moses and using them as worship, right? And so by doing that, they changed the meaning. And so we have to read these words with the midrash as part of the interpretation, right? So when the rabbis say that this means your heart and your soul and your might, as in your physical possessions, that we've got to read it that way. When in our Siddur, we can also have an understanding of what its biblical meaning might be, but our tradition is one of always kind of adding additional layers of meaning onto these words. Now, how about the second paragraph of the Shema? I don't want to spend too much time on this, just for overall themes. It starts, if then you obey the commandments that I enjoin upon you this day, loving the Lord your God, serving him with all your heart and soul, I'll grant the rain for your land in season, the early rain and the late. And then it goes on. Essentially, if you follow these mitzvot, if you follow my mitzvot, you will be blessed with prosperity, rain at the right time, abundant crops, all of that. If you do not, God will get mad at you and will shut up the skies, and it's going to be bad, right? So that's the first half of this. And then it goes on, and this should sound familiar. Therefore, impress these my words upon your very heart. There we have lev and nefesh, but no me'od. Put them on your heart and your soul. No mention of me'od here, right? Just the heart and soul, right? Bind them as a sign on your hand. Let them serve as a symbol on your forehead. Teach them to your children. At home, away, lie down, get up, doorposts, house and gates, right? To the end that you and your children may endure in the land that the Lord swore to your fathers to assign to them, as long as there is a heaven over the earth, right? So we come back to all of the same themes that occurred in the previous paragraph. Notice this is 5 chapters later in Deuteronomy. One major difference though. Here it's given in the second person plural, which is interesting, right? So in the first paragraph, it was second person singular. Here it's now being addressed to the nation as a whole. And maybe that's connected to this idea of, collective reward and punishment as a result of how well the nation does in observing the commandments. And then we have a third paragraph from Numbers, right? Does not repeat the same words and language at all. The Lord said to Moses as follows, speak to the Israelite people. Now this is God speaking. Instruct them to make for themselves fringes on the corners of their garments through the ages. Let them attach a cord of blue to the fringe at each corner. That shall be your fringe. Look at it and recall all the commandments of the Lord and observe them so that you do not follow your heart and eyes in your lustful urge, right? The first 2 paragraphs we're talking about God's commandments. Now in this paragraph, we're saying, okay, we're going to talk about tzitzit, which are the reminder for those commandments, right? So I always ask B'nai Mitzvah kids at the rehearsal, what are the tzitzit for? What are they supposed to do? And it says it right here, explicitly. You look at the tzitzit, you remember the commandments. It's like a collective tying a string around your finger to remember something, right? And then at the end of it, thus you shall be reminded to observe all my commandments and to be holy to your God. I, the Lord am your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt to be your God. I, the Lord your God. And so we get this final mentioning of God redeeming the Jewish people from Egypt. Again, not given in the context of a prayer at all. It's a commandment here, certainly. There's a ritual item here in the tzitzit. But these words themselves are not a prayer, and yet our tradition has transformed them into a prayer. And by bringing these three paragraphs together, it's put them in conversation with each other, right? So at some point, there was somebody who put these three one after the other and did so for a reason and wanted to tell a story of some sort, or wanted to convey a certain belief or impart a certain lesson to the person who was saying it.
Do we have any idea when that happened?
Okay. How old is the Shema
Perfect.
as a prayer?
Very.
Okay. This is referred to as the Nash Papyrus. It's dated to the 2nd century BCE, before the Common Era. This is before the rabbis, right? So this is, just to place it in time, this is after the Maccabean revolt, after Hanukkah. The Hasmoneans, like the family of Judah the Maccabee, they are in charge. They are the kings in Jerusalem. This was found in Egypt, though, and it was acquired in 1898. Until the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, this was the oldest Hebrew manuscript in existence. And what is it? It is a single document. It's a single parchment, just several inches tall. It's not part of a larger scroll. And what does it have on it? It's got Hebrew, and it's got interesting Hebrew. It's got the Decalogue, in other words, the 10 Commandments, and it's got the first 2 sentences of the Shema, right? So it's got the Shema and Ve'ahavta written on it. Just these 2 passages appearing on it. Also, there's a little preamble to the Shema. The first, so right before the Shema Yisrael line, we get this other verse, and these are the statutes and the judgments that Moses commanded the Israelites in the wilderness when they left the land of Egypt. Here it says that the Lord commanded. Now, what's interesting about this is that this verse does not appear in the Torah. It does appear in the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Bible, which dates back to Egypt around this time, 2nd century BC, 2nd and 3rd century BCE. And there are some other variants in language in here that do not conform to the Masoretic text, right? That's the Hebrew text that we have, but that in fact are seem to be the same as the Septuagint, right? So, which suggests that whoever wrote this down, whoever was using this, was relying upon, or their text was a different text than the Masoretic texts that we have today, and that the Septuagint was translated off of a similar text. Now, what was this text doing? What's its purpose?
Oh my God.
This reminds me of the part of the service that was the 10 Commandments and.
I thought I had set it off, but I actually had.
Yeah, I mean, clearly it's for prayer or recitation or something. It's not a reference volume.
Excuse me, one second. Sorry, folks.
No problem.
All right. So, Max, what were you just saying?
That it's for prayer or for it's for use. It's not a reference volume. It's a little bit like you might have excerpts from the book of Psalms around your house instead of, the book of Psalms themselves. And it's that same idea that this is the thing that you have out and you use and you refer to, and not the whole scroll that you have.
Right. So possibly it's like a Siddur, right?
Yeah.
Or a hymnal of some sort. There's some speculation that it might have been actually in tefillin of some sort, and putting the Decalogue and at least the beginning of the Shema. Now, does that ring a bell for anybody? Putting the Decalogue and the Shema together.
I thought there was a time that those two were the sort of the central part of this the service.
Yes. So we saw this, we looked at this last week, right? So this is, just to remind us, this is in Mishnah Tamid, which is describing the daily practice, the daily ritual in the temple. So already, just keep in mind this, because it's Mishnah, we're talking about something that's dating to the 2nd century of the Common Era, but it's remembering a time when the temple existed, and it's recording the rituals that took place. And so it says, the deputy high priest said to them, and the them there is the priests who were on duty. He says, bless one blessing, and they blessed, right? They say one bracha, then kar'u, notice the verb, kar'u, they read. It's the same verb as kriyat shema we talked about. Kar'u aseret hadvarim shema v'hayim shemoa vayomer. So they read the 10 commandments, and then the paragraphs beginning with Shema, v'hayim shemoa, and vayomer. Those are what we would refer to as the 3 paragraphs of the Shema. Then they blessed the people with 3 blessings. What were they? Emet v'yatziv, avodah, and the priestly blessing. Emet v'yatziv, that's the prayer right after for us, that's right after the Shema. Avodah is maybe the Amidah, or what eventually became the Amidah, but Avodah might be something else. Like, thanks for accepting our worship. And Birkat Kohanim is the priestly blessing. And on Shabbat, they added an extra one, extra blessing to be said by the watch as it was leaving. So, but interesting that we have this reference in the Mishnah that is referring to a liturgical recitation of the 10 commandments followed by the Shema. And we've got this piece of parchment that has the 2 of them together. And it's in Egypt too. It's not in the temple. So whereas here we've got it's the priests who are reciting this, in Egypt, someone else is reciting it, right? Maybe this is being used liturgically by common Jews.
So,
or maybe it's something that's specific to the community in Egypt because they're so far away from Jerusalem that they need to have developed some of their own practices. Mike.
When was the group at Elephantine?
Yeah, so they go back even earlier. I think like 4th, 5th century BCE, right? So yeah, there's a big Jewish community in Egypt, and like they've got a temple down in Elephantine. There's a synagogue in Alexandria. So there's a lot going on there. The Septuagint is written there, right? That would suggest that there is a big enough community to warrant the writing of the Bible into the first translation of the Bible into another language. All right, now let's look at the Mishnah. The rabbis, they get all of these traditions. The very first tractate of the Mishnah and then of the Talmud, of course, is Brachot, Masechet Brachot. The opening Mishnah, I didn't bring it here, is Me'ei matai korein et Shema be'erei. From what time do you read the Shema in the evening, right? Yes. What's the appropriate time to say the Shema at night? The Mishnah already presumes is that there is an obligation to do so, right? They don't even consider the possibility of whether or not we have to do it. They assume it, right? It's behind everything. So that was the first Mishnah. Because we're talking about the morning service, we're looking at the second Mishnah, which begins, Me'ei matai korin et Shema b'shachari. Right? From what time may one recite the Shema, may one read the Shema in the morning? So as all good rabbinic texts have, we have a disagreement. Mishiakir ben tchelet levan, from when you can distinguish between blue and white, right? Why blue and white?
Between night and day.
Well, it doesn't say night and day, right? So there's that moment.
Well, you've got your
at
tzitzit
dawn
handy.
when it starts to lighten in the sky. We know we've got to say the Shema in the morning. What's the first moment at which we can say it in order to fulfill the obligation? So why blue and white?
When the pre-dawn light turned from white into blue, when it started the day
What is blue and white? What do they have that's
Tzitzit.
blue and white?
Isn't that clouds and sky?
They've got
Supposed to have a
tzitzit.
blue thread in the
So when you can distinguish the blue in your tzitzit, the blue thread in your
Oh,
tzitzit,
when you can see it.
when you can see it, and when you can know, you can say, "Oh, it's blue," right? From that, that's how you know it's light enough. Remember, they don't have clocks, right? They got to rely on observation.
Oh my goodness.
So, all right, so that's the Tanakama, the anonymous voice of the Mishnah. Next, we get Rabbi Eliezer saying, "Bein tchelet lekarti," right? Between blue and green. All right, there we go.
Read my class.
The Gomra Aranetza Chama, and you've got to finish it by nates, which means the spark of the sun, right? So he wants you to say it really early, right? So dawn up until sunrise. That's when he wants you to say it. Now, that's not a very big...
How do you get up at dawn if you don't have an alarm clock?
Yeah, well, internal talk. Maybe you have a really accurate rooster. So that's maybe not so realistic. Rabbi Yoshua Omer ad shalosh sha'ot. Rabbi Yoshua says until the third hour of the day, and the day being the total daylight hours divided by 12 equals 1 hour. So the length of an hour changes over the course of a day. So in any event, Rabbi Yoshua says you've got that first 3 rabbinic hours of the day. So the first quarter of the daytime, that's the time period during which you got to say the Shema. Why? Shekain derech b'nei melachim la'amod b'shalosh sha'ot, right? Because kings and the children of, right, the way of kings is they get up at the third hour, right? So kings are lazy. They get to sleep in, right? And so we are gonna, I don't know, I guess get up before the kings and be done with it by then. But then it goes on, Hakareh mikan ve'elach lo hifsid ke'adam hakareh Torah. The person reads the Shema afterwards, right? After the third hour of the day, he hasn't lost out on anything. He's like a person, like he hasn't wasted his time. He's like a person who's reading from the Torah, right? It's good to read from the Torah. So if you read the Shema, you're reading from the Torah. So if you happen to not do it in the first 3 hours of the day, it's not like you've wasted your time. You've done Torah study, and that's a good thing. So that's what this Mishnah is presenting to us. Mm-hmm. So interesting. This is the first question that the rabbis are discussing in the Mishnah when it comes to saying the Shema in the morning. What's the proper time to do it in? The next Mishnah says, we get another argument between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. Beit Shammai say, the school of Shammai say, in the evening, every person should recline, like lie down and recite the Shema. And in the morning, he should stand, as it says, and then he quotes the Shema, Uvshochbecha uvkumecha, when you lie down and when you rise up. Beit Hillel say that every man should recite in his own way, as it says, and it says, Uvlechtecha v'derech, when you walk by the way. Then it asks, why then is it said, Uvshochbecha uvkumecha, when you lie down and when you get up? Answer, at the time when people lie down and at the time when people rise up. This is the question we were discussing earlier, and this is what Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel are disagreeing about. When it talks about when you lie down, when you rise up, is that describing the physical position of your body? Or is it describing a time period? So Beit Shammai says it's describing the physical position of your body, right? You need to lie down at night when you say it. You need to stand up in the morning when you say it. Beit Hillel says, no, it's not quite as narrow as you're saying, Beit Shammai. It means, that line means, first of all, it's describing a time period. So then what position do you need to be in? He says, Uvlechtecha v'derech, right? Korev kedarcho. You read it in your way, which is which is meant to be whatever you happen to be doing at the time that the time arrives for you to say the Shema, you should stay in that position. You should keep doing it, right? So if you happen to be sitting down when it's time to say the Shema, you stay sitting, right? If you happen to be standing up, you stay standing up. Now let's look at Rabbi Tarfon, because the Mishnah goes on and gives a real life happening. Rabbi Tarfon said, I was once walking by the way, and I reclined to recite the Shema according to the words of Beit Shammai, right? So in other words, it was at night. He's walking on the road. Nighttime came. He lied down on the ground to say the Shema, just like Beit Shammai says. And it says, and I incurred danger from robbers. I don't know what sikanti vatzmi. I endangered myself. I think he got robbed. Right. So then they said, he gets back, he tells the story in the Beit Midrash. They said to him, you deserved it, right? You deserve to come to harm because you acted against the words of Beit Hillel, right? The halakha, in every case, except for 6, follows Beit Hillel. And what did Rabbi Tarfon do? He followed Beit Shammai. And that's why the robbers got to him. He shouldn't have followed Beit Shammai. If he's walking along the road and the time has come for to say the Shema, how should he have said it?
Standing up.
Not even just standing up, while he's walking on the road.
Well, okay.
He should have kept going, right? So he gets a little rebuke from the other rabbis because he wasn't listening to Beit Hillel. Now, what's the Reform tradition for how to say the Shema?
Oh boy.
What?
It depends.
Depends. Ooh.
It's like the joke. The position is to argue about it.
Okay.
But in Shiradash, we stand for it.
Yeah. So I think that's probably the normal practice is to stand up when you get to the Shema. So why is that? It's because you stand up for things that you want to give a special honor to.
Right.
Right. And you want to say, this is the central declaration of faith of the Jewish people. Right. It's the closest thing we have to a catechism or something like that, a doxology, right? A core statement of belief. We should stand up for it. Right.
Right.
So clearly the Reform movement is not following Beit Hillel, right? Or Beit Shammai for that matter, because I think it's to stand up at all times. But that's not a problem because for the Reform movement, because the concept of the halakha being binding in that way and locked in is not something that the Reform movement embraces, right? So this is an innovation, right? It's a reform that was introduced by the Reform movement.
So the notion of lying down when you say the Shema, even if it's at night, it seems like the antithesis of paying homage to God as you're describing. So I'm trying to understand why you would it seems sacrilegious almost, that you would say the Shema while lying down.
Well, think about the original context of this prayer is that it's, not of this prayer, but of this teaching by Moses. It's that at all times and in all places, we need to be repeating these words, right? That's the important thing, right? It's not that it's a statement. It's not a declaration of faith, right? It's an act of love and commitment to God by having these words on our lips, at all times, right? So that would include when you lie down, right? So maybe the message is imparted even greater in that way. But what we have here, Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, both of them are guilty of myopic reading the text, right? They're trying to look, for Beit Shammai, he focuses on the when you lie down, when you rise up. Beit Hillel focuses when you're walking on the way. And they do that in order to kind of take these words and really apply them literally, which probably is not what Moses had in mind. But that's, the rabbis, as they're constructing the rules for prayer, this is what they do. Mishnah jumps ahead. So in chapter 2, remember we said that you need to have the blessings, 2 blessings before, 1 blessing after the Shema, and it didn't even tell us what the blessings were. We get 2 chapters of discussions about how to say the Shema, right? So this is what the rabbis are very concerned with, right? Person's going along, Haya koreva Torah. He's reading the Torah. That's our word, kriya. He's reading the Torah, and he gets to the section of the Shema, and the time for its recital has arrived, right? So I get up super early in the morning. I start reading the passage. I read the Shema just as the sun, just as the sky has lightened. Have I fulfilled my obligation? Right? That's the question. And now the Mishnah says, Im kivein libo yatsa, v'imlav lo yatsa. If he directed his heart, he is exempt. If not, he is not exempt. So exempt meaning exempt of the obligation. He's fulfilled the obligation. Kivein, right? So we've heard the word kavanah, spiritual intent. That's where this is where it comes from. Im kivein libo. If he directed his heart, right? And heart, of course, is mind. So what does it mean? What does the Mishnah mean? What does it mean if he directs his heart?
With intention.
Intention for what?
For the meaning of the words, for the prayer.
So possibility number one, he's paying attention to what the words mean. Any other possibilities? This, by the way, is a big debate in Jewish texts. Maybe less so now, but so the kind of this conclusion the Talmud comes to is that it means he intends to fulfill the mitzvah. So if while he's reading, he consciously is aware of his obligation to say the Shema in the morning, and that while I'm reading, this counts, I'm checking off my box by reading at this time, then he's fulfilled his obligation. If he just read through it and then afterwards realized, hey, it was time for the Shema, doesn't count. Right? So it's not necessarily concerned that he was paying attention to the words. At least this passage is not necessarily concerned with that. Now, don't think that that's not important, because it is going to become important. But the original concept of what is kavanah, right? What is intention? It's kavanah latzet, which means the intention to exempt oneself from the obligation, the intention to have checked off the box of fulfilling the mitzvah at the appropriate time.
I thought Kavanah meant you're putting your heart and soul into your prayer.
Well, that's how we, I think, use the word today. But this is the question: how much intention do you need for something that we've got to do twice a day, every single day? How much kavanah can you really have? I mean,
exactly. And if you're supposed to be saying it all the time or thinking it all the time, then your life is at some weird existence that
so it's a very difficult standard to reach. But this is a discussion, a debate that they have. And then it goes on. What about interrupting people in the breaks between sections? One may give greeting out of respect and return greeting. You're davening along. Somebody says good Shabbos to you. Can you say good Shabbos back to them? That's the question, right? The answer is, if you're between sections, the answer is yes. So what does it mean between sections? It goes on and discusses that. I didn't bring that now, but basically we saw the first two blessings before the Shema. So the space between when the first blessing ends and the second blessing begins, that's one blessing, right? Between the paragraphs of the Shema, each of the three paragraphs, those constitute breaks. So if somebody says good Shabbos to you and you're just at the end of Ve'ahavta, when you finish Ve'ahavta, you can say good Shabbos back to them, but not in the middle, right? And then it goes on. In the middle, one may give greeting out of fear and return it, the words of Rabbi Meir, right? So they understand that if the king walks by and says good Shabbos to you, you interrupt your blessing. Or if a great sage, right? If the rabbi says good Shabbos to you, you say good Shabbos back. But if your neighbor does, forget it. Right?
So it's honors gabbai if I interrupt people. I'm
that's a very lofty position.
But you as rabbi could come around and interrupt Eli Reinhardt in the middle of, and it's fine.
Yeah, so Rabbi Judah says, in the middle, one may give greeting out of fear and return it out of respect. So give greeting means I can go up to say to somebody, right? So if the king is walking by and I happen to be sitting there in the middle of the Shema, I can initiate good Shabbos to the king, right? And return it out of respect. That's maybe if the rabbi's walking by, I can say good Shabbos back. In the breaks, one may give greeting out of respect and return greeting to anyone, right? So anyway, so we've got a little dispute about how the general thing is you're not supposed to interrupt, right? You're not supposed to be speaking between in the middle or between paragraphs. But if somebody really important comes by, there might be a reason to respond back to them. But the tradition is from basically from Baruch or even before Baruch Hu through the end of the Amidah. There's really no talking, right? That's
And
that's
people
what the
always,
halakha is.
people don't know that.
People
And
don't
they
know.
come up and I just kind of nod and, and hope they understand. But yeah.
But again, there's a sense you can see here they recognize there's an issue there, right? There's a sense of respect, right? If somebody said, like, you can respond back to them as a sign of respect. If you get a sense that someone might be offended if you don't respond back to them, maybe it's appropriate to.
Sometimes I do it after services are over.
Yeah.
I'm sorry I didn't.
All right.
It's interesting, but between any paragraphs except the Amidah is an exception to all this. Is that correct?
The entire Amidah should be silent. Yeah.
Question. The Shoel Shalom, not Shabbat Shalom, but Shoel Shalom when somebody comes and say, how do you do?
How you doing? Yeah.
Shalom Alech, Ma Shlomcha.
Right. Because this is not just talking about Shabbat.
Yeah.
This is talking about daily prayer. Right.
Yeah, if somebody come inside the synagogue and somebody asking, Ma Shlomcha, how do you do?
How do you do? Yeah.
So if the king asks you, you have to answer.
Always.
So there is kind of the issue is disturbing one by Shalom, interested in his peace of mind.
Mm.
It's not about Shabbat or something else. And this is kind of normal communication. Is you say, how do you do? Or Ma Shlomcha, how your state of peace, which is mind needs, mind basically. And you have to respond for that. That means people are, even in the middle of tefillah, feel responsible to ask other people how they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's mostly in the state of mind rather than the business side, which is interesting.
Yeah. But you can see that there is the Mishnah already introduces this idea of kavanah.
Yeah.
Right? It's awareness of what you're saying in some form, in some form or another, and a recognition that other people can be a distraction from that potentially, right? So they're wrestling with this, right? Because we are part of a community. We do this in communities. So, all right, I think we're gonna stop here.